Happy Memorial, everybody. Memorial Day for those of you in the United States. I watched Rinska Downey's video this morning. She did, I think she called a kiss Dutch pour, where part of it was just white, the other part was her color swirled. She moved the white into the color all the way down and then blew it back. Now this is a wood board, not a canvas. It already came pre-painted from Home Depot. It's a Rubbermaid board, and my thought is if it comes out pretty, I'm going to want to resin it as a first layer of a resin painting. So what I have lined up here, I'm using the Primary Element Art Pigments, the Polypore, to mix the pigments into the consistency for pouring medium. Now let's explain just a little bit about Polypore. If you look at the back of all of your acrylic paints, they almost all start made with 100% acrylic polymer. So the word poly in the Polypore means high polymer, what you would mix to make Winsor Newton acrylic paint out of a tube. Pour means we blended those high polymers with the right amount of acrylic mediums and extenders. They're softer mediums, so it makes them softer for pouring, to the perfect consistency for paint pouring, thus the name Polypore. You could also use this as a glazing medium and make transparent glazes. It makes a nice brush painting. We haven't discovered everything we can do with this. I've even seen artists thin down their traditional paints using the Polypore, which I wasn't sure was going to work. We recently also came out with the art fluid, which is technically the extender for this. And we use its multiple uses. You can make sprays. There's another video when I was doing the resin painting, I was coloring my rocks and glass with it. This has multiple uses, but this also will extend the Polypore. However, for the Dutch pour, which Rinska's famous for her Dutch pour technique, a lot of people are doing this technique with the thin down paints. You need to add a little bit of water to them so they move. Now, I had a couple colors of the Polypore mixed up from ages ago in my squeeze bottles. So this is a kiwi. I'm going to add a little water. All this is Primary Element Kiwi, Polypore, and you just saw me if you put a few drops of water. This is the Royal Orchid. I'm going to add some of the Vivid Art Fluid. I'm going to try to use this as my extender for my Winsor Newton blue. Love that blue. I want to have at least one solid color, but because I'm going to have white, I'll have two matte opaque colors with the Primary Elements, which are translucent and shimmery. And when you use all shimmery paints, there's not something underneath it for the light to refract off of. There's no base, and sometimes your paintings are either too glittery or it just doesn't seem like the colors are holding together. So I like this Winsor blue. Probably going to have to add more water to this. I've got a nice consistency here, other than it's not thin enough for the Dutch pour. And the Dutch pour, or this fluid air pour, however you want to call this technique, where we're blowing the white or swiping the white over the top and blowing it back, you want your paint a little bit more fluid than normal. My white today is actually going to be a zinc white. First time I've tried this white. And it's thinned down with just water. And when I kept having to add water, I added a little bit of the art fluid just to make sure there was enough bonding agent in here, binder, as I'm adding more water to it. So this is basically my Riotech zinc mixing white. Artist Loft is made out of titanium, and that's why it's so heavy. And on wetcanvas.com, they recommended taking your mixing white 50-50 with your titanium white to kind of keep that chalkiness away. But I've never used this before, and I want to see what it looks like straight. It's really got an interesting fluid, pretty texture to it, and it doesn't feel chalky like that Artist Loft. Love the Artist Loft black, but I have trouble with the Artist Loft white every once in a while. Okay, see if we can't get a close up on these three. Now this is a color called Stargazer, this is a color called Snapdragon, and this is, I'm going to experiment. This is 50/50 Interference Violet and Bling IT Sparkle Gold. Well, they're both Bling ITs, but the large particulate gold. I just want to see what happens if, because I'm working on a black background, if I get any transparencies, will that pick it up? I just want about an ounce or less. I don't need that much paint. And it's a heaping spoon, which these are 1/8 of a teaspoon, to about an ounce and a half of the polypore. And then we're going to make a paint out of the interference mica and the sparkle gold mica. I keep forgetting this is a slightly bigger board than a 10 by 10. Here's your Stargazer. It's a blue violet. I have new lighting, so we're going to see how this lighting works for y'all. It's a blue violet in an interference green base, and I'm hoping on the black, the transparency, it really shows up underneath that black, even though I'm not going to blow it into the black, which this would be beautiful on a black Dutch pour. This is our Snapdragon purple. So in effort to save some time, I've sped up this part of the video and we're going to do a voiceover. I also had a few audio challenges and background noise that at the time when I was doing this, so I felt it was best that I do a voiceover. What I'm going to attempt to do is do that kiss that Rinska Downey had done earlier today, where she put the white. So this is that Reatech white mixed with the Vivid Art fluid and water. At this point, I already know it feels a little bit too thick. I'm worried about, so I'm checking with my dryer, is it even going to move? And it did, but it didn't. It kind of grabbed a little bit more than I wanted it to. Of course, you can see me talking in this thing because I think this video is going to be a talkie. So I add a little bit more water to the mix. At this point, I don't know if it's a mistake or not. I don't know that my end result is going to be as amazing as I thought it was. I finally worked my way out of it. So that first color is that Snapdragon mixed with the polypore. Wait a minute, that was the lighter purple was Royal Orchid. This is the Snapdragon. Apologies. This is the Stargazer. This is that interference violet that I mixed with the gold. You guys didn't get to see me mix it on camera because of some camera malfunctions. Really had some issues with the lighting and the sound this round, but we're trying to get our lighting down. And I think that actual first color, I'm going to have to correct myself again. I think that first dark color was the Windsor Blue. Because as I'm looking at this, I could see Windsor Blue, Snapdragon, and that last violet I put down was kind of a red violet. That green is the Kiwi. And at this point, you can see me pointing with my hands. I'm like going, do I have enough paint? So I grab a little bit more of the Royal Orchid, add some water to it, and I had way too much paint at the end, but I didn't know it. So I wouldn't do what I'm doing per se on the camera because I added more Royal Orchid. And then I decided I was going to mix up some Mystic Blue. It's a
It's kind of a darker blue teal that we've got. So real quickly, here I am on camera, just grabbing a little bit of that Mystic Blue powder, dumping in some polypore. That is the cool thing about the polypore. If in a pinch, you're in a hurry, there isn't not a lot of mixing involved. If your acrylic polymers, you know, at least it's unique with the primary elements that we're lucky enough to be able to mix our colors up this quick and use them. So you can see how pretty that dark Mystic Blue is. So I'm adding the rest of this deep teal that I mixed up, the Mystic Blue. And every drop of everything else I've got ready. At this point, I realize, I might have a little bit too much paint on the board. Here I mixed up more and added more. I probably didn't need it. I'm going to drizzle a little bit of white and then that extra bit of white that we're supposed to add before we blow the color over. Now, I think for me, here I've been thinking it's the consistency, and the majority of the public thinks it's the consistency. But notice what happens when I finally get my gun at the right angle. So it's not just how wet the paint is, you have to get that gun angled to the right position. So here I'm starting to hit it with my torch. And this is a tube that I cut. It's about a 2.5 inch tube. I'm not quite as young as Rinska. I can't bend over and blow in the canvas, so I have a 2.5 foot of tube. Hold one in my mouth and the other in, and I can manipulate around with my hands in any direction I want the air to go. My own homemade little airbrush. So I'm tilting the paint up a little bit up on one end, and you can see how much paint is on there. But I figured I might as well move some of it up towards the other end. So it feels a little bit more balanced. So I'm trying to give you a close up here with a flashlight. Again, I apologize 100% for my lighting, but I'm going to do my best to kind of give you a close up of what this looked like right after it was poured. So I'm going to let this thing sit for a few hours and we'll see what it looks like when we come back.
So here's what it looks like. About 12 hours later, I went to bed. There's still little pockets that are moist in here. I had way too much paint on this thing. But I like how that interference in the stargazer bloomed, or the interference in that the violets bloomed, and then the stargazer here really gave us a beautiful line. I'm going to try to get a line of distinction. I'm sorry, I'm just kind of like eyeballing this thing. I love the color combination. Let's see which part. This is looking kind of dark. I have new lighting, so we're going to see how this lighting works. Yeah, I like that corner over there. It's darker, but when you see the pattern in there, that's kind of pretty. I'm wondering, because I've never used the Riotech before, and I use the Vivid Art Fluid only as its extender plus water. Maybe there's something in this combination that caused this interesting fractaling. This paint's too thick. You can see waves of where, see that lighter area? That's waves. You can see the board, but then this is paint on top, and then paint, and then the board. The board. Now, because it's wood, and I was planning on resining over this, I thought it might be really pretty to resin. That's why there's no silicone or anything in here. I could, in theory, add a little bit of just some, be really pretty if these areas here, I just laid a tiny bit of just straight interference. Any of these areas where it looks like it's, there's here, 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 a little bit here, 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 and here, where if I just went straight polypore with interference and kind of just flooded these areas slightly, maybe I'll do that on the camera now. I don't really want to wait 3 days to put this video up, because this down here is already dry. That's one thing about the polypore. Got, you know, even though I added a little bit of water in there, the polypore dries pretty fast. That's why, and not to be bashing Floetrol, because Floetrol to me is an additive. When you watch Tammy Anderson put it in her white, and that's the only thing where the Floetrol exists, and you get this beautiful lacing when she does that Dutch pour, Floetrol's probably assisting in it. Rinska Dauna, until I can actually play with the white she has, I'm suspicious. My suspicion would be, or my conclusion would be, there's something in her white, just as I think there's something in this white, that will create some cell destruction, because that's how you get these patterns in cells and all this cool stuff. It's from using paint from one company, like I use some Winsor Newton, and I use some Riotech, along with the Primer Elements mixed with the polypore. And then I put my Vivid Art Fluid in here, and the Vivid Art Fluid, yes, is a slightly different beast than the polypore, made by us. I know what's in it. You know, we use some of the same compounds, but this is a little unique. So what I'm trying to say is, you're getting a natural pattern reaction, cell disruption. The cells are reacting to one another, the chemistry is reacting to one another, because you're using paint from different manufacturers. So I think I will, now of course the expected color would probably be blue, because it's blue up here, but I think I would like to use something unexpected, like a violet and gold, which is what I used down here.
So there was some more background issues. I know this video is going back and forth with voiceover and my voice and voiceover and my voice. But I'm mixing the polypore, the interference violet, and a little bit of sparkle gold. And I'm going to patch up those little white areas where I got dips. And I could see the gray, kind of looks gray where that black board is coming through. And so I'm just gently kind of spooning on the paint, because I'm going to resin over the top of this. Even if that's the beautiful thing about resin. If I have some uneven texture on level 1 because of my paint, the resin is self-leveling, and it's going to go over the whole thing, and any of the texture that's in that paint is going to look dimensional, three-dimensional under the resin. So I didn't mind having to patch this in. Plus I know those extra little glints might look like light waves or light beams coming down through the water in the top if this was like an underwater design. And I ended up with extra, so I started looking for any place that I thought might benefit from this little bit of shimmer in those white areas. And I did push the envelope kind of into that blue white anywhere where it was sort of dry or I felt I could get away with it. I had a little bit. Anyway, I will be excited to see what this looks like once it's dry.
So it's been about 48 hours since I did this iridescent patch. I had this area that had, for whatever reason, see if the camera can pick this up. See that iridescent shimmering right there, that violet and gold? So when I had done my piece, it had dried, which is strange. I got that fractaling, but it had dried where all these light parts were. It kind of dipped down into the wood, and I could just barely see that Reatech white because that's just kind of transparent, and it looked like the black board underneath. So I took some of the polypore, a little bit of interference violet and sparkle gold, a little larger particulate, mixed them together and kind of patched them there. And then I add a little bit anywhere where it kind of had white or real light colors. I put a little bit down here even though it really didn't need it. So when I resined over, we get some effects. Now, it's interesting how that white fractaled into the Windsor blue and the majestic blue. Anyway, so at this point, I'm just going to do one single layer. Looks kind of dark from this angle. I moved it because I have a slightly hotter light right here, and I'm hoping that it picks up that color because we got a lot of purple. The board was black, but I did not use any black color. We did use a lot of interference in it, okay? So I'm hoping, and this is where I had some of the interference violet mixed with the gold, same thing I used up here, but kind of used it in my pour, in my blow. So I'm hoping by wetting this, and normally that's what happens, is the sparkle and stuff that we know that's in this paint will come right back to life when it's varnished, and when you resin over it is beautiful. So I've got my Liquitex, it's open, but that gloss shiny varnish gallon, love this stuff. It's very, very juicy, thin, it feels like water. I like the sponge because it does not leave brush marks. I still like to go one direction, even though I'm not having to seal the silicone. I just know that I get a better application by going one direction. Interesting. I'm getting some resistance here, and I'm not exactly sure why. I know that the board, this Rubbermaid board that I got, felt slick. But the paint seemed to do okay on it. See, I'm going one straight direction. And yeah, that's kind of lifting that color back to life. It's going to be really pretty under the resin. I'm not sure how much the light's going to pick up that purple there for you guys. No, it's under the light. So my plan is I'm going to do what's called a flood coat on this. When you guys see this video, you'll realize how long it took to do, because I'll do a flood coat, meaning just a simple plain coat of resin over the top of this so the color underneath is not disturbed. Okay. Then I'm going to sandwich some primary elements between, lay some primary elements between, actually straight onto the resin, the dried resin. Sorry, I'm getting lines in here. I really want this saturated well. I'm not sure why it's having trouble going down. I don't think there is a coating on this board. Oop, I don't want to go the other way. I want to go the same way. The resin just, the varnish just seems to bring the color back to life, and then when the resin goes over the top of it, it's really, really shimmery. It's like putting a magnifying glass on top. So, well, this lighting looks a little bit better than what we've had when I shot the video. I was testing these new lights and I moved them around to do this section, and I feel better in this lighting. So, see if you can get any close-ups on this so you guys can see what that looks like. Of course, we know in that center area, well, that interference is, that is going to be really beautiful right there, where that like little cloud of interference is. But there's another little warm spot. There's a spot here where it's starting to glow. You can see the violet and the gold coming out. It's starting to lift up and be visible. This looks a little bit more periwinkle, but there's wisps of stargazer blue through here that will show up once it's resined. Yeah, it's going to be real pretty. I think it'll be pretty, at least as a, turn this around, sorry. At least as a base coat for resin. Yeah, and a lot of nice color shifting on that. This area here where the interference and the gold, sparkle gold is, that's that large particulate gold. Okay, well, this part's done. We're going to let this dry several hours, and we'll be back to do the clear resin flood coat. See you guys in a bit. So now that the varnish is on there, you can see the colors really come back. It's come back to life. This area that looks so dark is now that beautiful snapdragon. There's the Winsor Newton blue. You can see the mystic blue. The lighter areas is the stargazer. This is really going to come to life under the resin. And of course these cute little patches that I made with the iridescence on the top. It's all lifted up. This looks so textural. I mean, it was an accident. I really think the Reatech, this is the only thing that's different. There's something in it that created fractals. I don't mind because I blew the paint up there. It's like these little fractals grew up in here and created these little CV textures, and I didn't do anything to cause that. Just the Reatech did. I had water in it and a little bit of the Vivid Art fluid just to thin it down because it didn't need polypore. I mean, it's already got a high polymer in it. It just needed to thin it down a bit. So we're just going to do a clear coat of resin over the top. And then I'm going to do something on the layer once it's dried. But so you usually put it in the middle. If you're going to do a flood coat, pop your bubbles. You're going to glide your heat gun over the top. You're not cooking it, you're not boiling it, you're just trying to let the heat of the heat gun warm up the resin so it runs a little bit smoother. And as long as you see little dancing pops going on, you still have bubbles to pop. Okay. Now I got these little silicone tools they use for putting hair on. hair dye on. I know I can use more resin than that. I should have just poured my whole amount on. I think I will in just a second. But instead of, because you'll use a lot of gloves, and a lot of resin workers will put 2 and 3 pairs of gloves on at once. So you can, if you happen to get resin on your hand but you want to pick up your heat gun, you're going to take off that glove so you don't lock your heat gun. I can't tell you how many times I've had to undo the button on this because I accidentally resined it shut. So word to the wise, extra gloves, or use tools like this. silicone. It'll wipe right off with a little bit of spray alcohol. I keep a bottle of alcohol on my table at all times when I'm working with resin. I am going to put the rest of this on, but oh my god, this color is just coming to life here. It's crazy. Again, we're going to heat this up. Oh, this is, oh wow, this is, right here is just amazing. Since it's just clear, I can pick up the extra, so I'm not wasting any. Many times I'll tape them off, but I kind of just want an even coat over. I know that I have seen other artists a lot more careful, tape it off, and then about, I don't know, 2 hours into it, after the initial resin on the top starts to level off. And that's one thing about resin, it's self-leveling. So even if my little dips up here that I tried to fill in, that resin's going to fill that in, and it's actually going to look more dimensional because those dips are there. That's why I added the interference and the sparkle to kind of magnify that. I'm going to end up using all of this. Get it one more bit of heat. And then just, you have to look at every angle. You know, left, right, backwards, forward. Every angle you can. Make sure your piece is level. And your edges are fully covered. Just a flood coat, just to get a nice coat of resin. Oops, looks like I missed here. Good thing for leveling. I've used combs in the past too, like a wide tooth comb, because only part of the resin gets moved and the other part of the resin kind of stays static. It's pretty easy to move your resin around then. But art resin is self-leveling. Let me see if I missed something here. I have some areas here. Okay, I'm going to give it just a little bit more heat. Put every bit of drip of resin, everything that's dripped off the edge. I'm just going to put it back in the center here because it's clear. It's not like I'm going to make a mess, right? It's not much, but okay, let me heat this up. Well, this is interesting. This has kind of an underwater effect. Those almost look like undersea plants, but light coming through. Maybe a more creative person might see a jellyfish formation in here, and on the next layer, draw and paint with a little acrylic paint to kind of bring up the shapes. I will look and see if I see any shapes. I was just kind of going to do some dry primer elements with water between the layers and show you what the primer elements can do with resin between the layers. I'll still do some of that, but okay, wait for the next segment. I'll zoom up as much as I can on this, but We're not going to get much shimmer, and I'm not going to be able to turn it, but there you go. See you in the next segment. So here we are 12 hours later. It's going to be a little bit hard to try to get. So we have all these lights here, metallic lights up. Not sure if mine. See how close we can get. And then if we could let you guys see. See, there's my lighting coming through here. That's the one thing with resin is you get glare. Oh my God, the colors on these. It's absolutely phenomenal. The area that was so dark over here that I was so worried about, you're really getting a nice changeable look. My kiwi came back up. I got some of my green back. All in all, I really like it. The fractals, they're still a mystery. They're really cool. They look so dimensional in there, especially in that resin. So I think the next thing, and this is where you're like, am I going to screw it up at this point? Or do I make it better? My instinct is just to take some of our color, mix it either in a little bit of acrylic or even water. This is an interesting point. And just kind of paint highlights into some of the areas that were darker. I could go over the top and maybe put in a jellyfish that's in here. You know, maybe, even though this is kind of a hot spot, so that this is either part of the jellyfish or my jellyfish is coming out of a darker area. I'm not sure. I'm going to think about this for a little while this morning, decide what I'm going to do next, because I kind of like it the way it is, and yet I want to push this. I want to show you guys what you can do in between your next layers. Because anything you put between the layer, sandwiched between that layer, is phenomenal. Now, I'm going to show you something that I haven't showed you guys, I don't think ever. It'll give you an idea, okay? Last year, I did a piece where I did the deli paper on my board. I took deli paper, painted with the vivid enamel. Some of you might remember that red piece. I'm going to get this wood piece out of the camera because it will confuse things if they're both in the same area. Okay, you're probably like wondering, what the heck is this? Okay, so if you go back into the history of our videos, I'm going to try to clean this up. The sides are really bad. They need to be cleaned up. You're going to see a piece where I took the red deli paper and I put it on a jelly plate. It's a mono printing plate. Took our vivid enamel, our colors in the enamel. You can hand mix your own with the primary elements in the vivid enamel. You don't need to buy our pre-mixed bottles. And I did this board in red poinsettia. And actually, I can tell it was on this end where I did one area, one strip of the red poinsettia without the deli paper, one strip of the red poinsettia on the deli paper, and then I think I went spice pumpkin and then sunflower, some orange and a yellow, okay? And I graduated up. Well, then I'm sitting here wondering, well, what do I do with this next, okay? And I was experimenting with different things, seeing if the primary elements would work. So I'm not sure if you're going to catch this one little area here. See this one little area here? This was actually the first thing I put down on it. You can see a little tip of it right here where it's coming out. It's not going to show up much in the camera, but I had taken just Stargazer, one of our primary elements, and water, and painted it here. You can see part of it peeking out here, part of it peeking out here. Some of the blue is up underneath this section here. You see how it's coming out through here. I think most of it got covered. I can see a little bit of it peeking right here and a little bit of it peeking right here where it came through. I kind of did this weird amoeba over the top. And I think I even filmed that and show you guys that I had put the primer elements simply with water. Because you're normally you need a binder with the primary elements or any kind of pigment that you're going to use. But because I knew I was going to add another resin coating over the top, right? I tested to see, can I just get away with water? I should be able to, because once the water is completely evaporated off, the resin's going to make that pigment just sandwich right between. So then what you do is you take areas that you like, and of course I did an entire flood coat. I shouldn't say of course, you wouldn't have noticed that, but I ended up doing an entire flood coat over the top of all that red and orange, and just let my little blue amoeba stand in here to see what's going to happen. Then as I've been doing pours with the Resin Art, testing it out over the last few months, leftover paint, I just came and kind of dumped. You can see I can dump the gold around here, or this is so cool, and because that red was already dried a few layers below, as the red was kind of dry below here, when I took our Mystic Primrose and a little bit of Stone Coat black, that matte black that creates the lacing, and just put some of it there and like laced over the black. You may not be able to see it, but there's a little tiny bit of red still glowing through here, but there's an amazing amount of red glowing through here. The cool part is by having that red base, it's coming through no matter what. It's a little dimensional because even right here, I don't know if the camera's going to pick this up, but see the texture there? You can see where I'm dumping the paint on as I'm done with the pour, right down here. See that ridge? This little section here is a little bit higher. So I've been kind of using this as my abstract experiment, and I kind of like it. I mean, even down here, this area is a little bit higher and this is a little bit lower. But once you have a base coat of clear resin, you can actually get more textural on your second or third layer. I don't mind that this gold is sitting higher and this is sitting higher than the rest of this. You know, I could probably just clean up the back of this thing, find a way to frame it. Unfortunately, this was a test on a little 7/8 inch. And this is canvas. Guys, it's just a cheapy canvas. And normally you don't put resin on canvas. And yet I think just working slowly, layer with layer with layer, I wouldn't have tried this great experiment on canvas thinking it was going to work, because usually canvas will sag. But I think because I did the deli paper first and glued it tight before I even resined it, it's kind of like spraying the back of the canvas and making it taut. I think that's what made this thing, because this thing feels like wood, and it's not. It's just a cheap 7/8 inch canvas. But I really wanted you to see this reflection, especially right here, what happens when I put that primer element strictly just raw on that resin. You can see those highlights of blue popping from here down to here. So in my mind, I'm seeing, can I kind of do this kind of treatment over the top of my other colors on this piece that I'm working on? And I wanted you to get an idea of you know, what you can do with a lot of people say, what are you doing with the leftover resin? Well, this is what I'm doing with the leftover resin. So I don't know, I guess I'll clean this up and frame this, and if somebody really wants it, they can let me know. It's highly unusual. There will never be a second one exactly like this. But now you get the idea of where I think I can take this on another layer. It's a lot of possibilities on the additional layers building up on this. And if you have an area that you like, as I did with my piece below, we'll put a little bit of clear over the areas that we definitely want to preserve. We don't want them to change at all. Well, let me backtrack again. If you're just working with acrylic in between the layers, it's a moot point. It's kind of a I call it the Bruce Riley technique or phenomena because he's putting acrylic paints in between his resin layers and his work is beautiful. So if you're just putting it in between, I can take the time, I can take hours to sit and detail paint exactly what I want. Okay. Now, if you're working with adding resin colors in between your layers, then you'll take an area like I did here and put clear over the top and preserve that area while I add more stuff around it. So, all right, well, I think I might stop this video here and upload this thing so you guys can get a gander of where this is going, because there's a lot of people using the primary elements, and when it dries it gets darker and they're like, oh my god, where'd the color go? They have no idea that with a little bit of varnish, the color will pop. But boy, if you're willing to put a flood coat of resin on top, colors come back gorgeous. Anyway, thoughts for your imagination, something to stimulate everybody's brain. And I will see you guys next time. And happy pouring. Bye.